Hello students, and welcome to chapter number 1. In this chapter we will be discussing the basics of the process of communication, as well as communication in the context of organizations and businesses. So let us begin with the definition of the process of communication. It is sending and receiving messages, and that sending and receiving of messages can happen through language, either spoken or written, meaning that the process of communication appears through different types of language mediums. So spoken words, verbally, so that's verbal communication, that's part of it. Another part of it is written words. So when we talk about writing, we talk about, not necessarily only on paper, but, texting, tweets, all types of written words are considered also communication. But at the same time, we also have nonverbal communication. And this happens through body language, through gestures, facial expressions, and even voice qualities. When you bring your voice tone up and down, this also says something. This conveys a message. So as long as someone sends a message and another person receives that message, we can say that communication has taken place, that there has been a communication here. So you send a message and then someone else receives it. How do you send that message? We can use verbal words or we can use nonverbal cues of communication. So as long as we have those components, then we can say communication has taken place. So let us talk a little about the importance of business communication, or of communication skills in general. So why do we even have an entire course dedicated to communication? Because communication is a very important skill that employers want from you as graduates, as university graduates. When you have good communication skills, this can help you get hired. This can help you perform very well on your future job and also earn promotions. It is said that through communication and through the way you communicate with others and how you present yourself, that you will get the job that you aim for. So it is of absolute paramount importance that you learn about communication and try to improve your communication skills so that you get far ahead in life. Communication is, of course, also important for you as a business owner or as a businessman. You are going to study a course called project feasibility analysis or entrepreneurship if you are in the business department. So in there you learn about starting your own business and how to develop your own project. So for that you are going to need to convince others to invest in your business. You are going to want to persuade others to buy your product or get your services. So in order to do that, you definitely need good communication skills so that you can communicate with people, convince them, persuade them of your products and services. It also helps you achieve your personal and social goals. Everything in life happens because of the relationships that you develop with others, whether it's your managers, whether it's your friends and peers, or investors. So you definitely need good communication skills, and you definitely need to know how do you present yourself and how do you present what you are capable of in front of others so that you can achieve your goals. In a survey, it was found that employers said that the top skill that they require from job candidates was ability to verbally communicate with people inside and outside the organization. So this is the opinion of the companies, of the employers. They want job candidates, they want you to be able to communicate very well if you are going to be hired. So this is how important communication is. So this is how we are going to go about explaining business communication. We have four dimensions to this construct, to this process. So we are going to discuss, first of all, the components of communication. Then we are going to talk about communication barriers, the media choices, and then finally we are going to talk about legal and ethical communication. So this is our let's say roadmap for this chapter. So we are going to begin with components of communication. So in any communication process, in any type of communication, we have different components of this communication. So we begin with the need to communicate, and we will call it later the stimulus. So what drove you and provoked you, what motivated you to say something in the first place? Why did you say that? Why do you feel that there's a need to say something? So that's what is called the communication need, or as we will see later, the stimulus. And then, of course, we have a sender. So we have the person who is going to formulate this message, a person who felt that there was a need to say something or to do something, to communicate something to others. So that's the sender. The sender does a lot of things. The sender interprets the communication context. So he or she explains what needs to be communicated, and then they also identify and analyze the audience. So before you even say something, you are supposed to have done a lot of things. You are supposed to have analyzed your audience in order to formulate a good message for them. And then the sender also determines the objectives. So why am I saying something? What is the purpose here? And then the sender also chooses the medium, the channel through which this message is going to travel. So am I going to communicate verbally or non-verbally? If it is verbally, meaning I'm going to use words to communicate, am I going to do it in writing or am I going to do it in speaking? And then if I'm going to do it in writing, am I going to post it on a tweet or am I going to send it in a text message? Am I going to write it in an official letter? So the medium is also a big decision that the sender makes. And then finally, the sender is also the creator of the message. So they choose whatever words and whatever nonverbal cues that are going to go there. Then the third component we have is the message itself. So what is that exactly? What has the sender said? And then we all have the receivers or the audience of the message. So these are the people, the person or the people who are going to be receiving that message. What do? Once they receive that message, whether it's spoken, written, or nonverbal, they are going to, first of all, interpret. They're going to try to explain it, to analyze it in order to understand it. And then they are going to provide feedback. So they are basically going to form a new message, which they are going to send back to the original sender. So, and then the process continues. So this is how communication works. So that feedback coming from the audience is basically their response to the message that has been originally formulated by the sender. So now we are going to break it down even further. So we have said that before we have a need to communicate. So that's what is called the stimulus. So a stimulus is a need to say something. You have seen something in your surroundings, in your environment, and you felt that I must communicate something to someone. So that is what is known as the stimulus. So it is an event, it is something that has happened to you, something that you have observed or seen that created a need to say something and to formulate a message and to communicate something to someone. The stimulus can be both internal and external. So an internal stimulus is an internal need that stems from within. So something that when you reflect sometimes, when you just sit by yourself and think, and sometimes this provokes the need to say something to others, to share your thoughts and feelings sometimes with others, to speak your mind. An external stimulus comes to you through your sensory organs, meaning when you see something, when you smell something, when you touch something, when you hear something. So sensory organs, how you feel. So through your sensory organs, you interact with your environment, and then this provokes the need to communicate certain types of messages to your audience. And then we have what is called the filter. So what is a filter? A filter is your perception. It's based on your knowledge, your experience, your point of views. So everything you observe, everything that you hear, everything that you receive gets filtered, and you understand it differently. And this is why I can say something and Khalid understands it differently. Noura understands it differently. Muhammad understands it differently. Why? Because each and every one of those people has their own filter. So when I say, for example, that all of you are good students, all of you are good students. Khalid understands it that, oh, this teacher is trying to encourage us. He's trying to, be positive. Muhammad understands it that, oh, this teacher is being sarcastic. He's trying to make fun of us. So this is the filter that we are talking about. How does it form? Where does it come from? It's based on your knowledge, based on your experience, based on your point of views, based on your personality, based on your, how you see things, basically. So once your brain receives a message, you interpret, you explain, you analyze the message, and you decide how to respond. So as we mentioned before, so I can say something, but it's understood differently. It is interpreted, it is explained differently by different people. Why? Because each and everyone has their own way of thinking, has their own personality, and so on. So, and then we have the message itself. It's the information that is communicated. It's what you want, others to know. So there was a need to say something. This saying of something was filtered through your own experiences and, personality and so on. And then this message is formulated, whether it's verbal using words or non-verbal using body language. And now we have the medium, or the form or the channel through which this message is going to travel. So are you going to communicate this message using a meeting, a face-to-face meeting, or are you going to communicate it using an email, or is it going to be posted on a tweet? So this is what we mean by medium. So it is the channel or the form through which this message is going to be created and communicated. And finally, we have the destination. So this is basically the point when control passes from the sender to the receiver. So the destination is basically the audience, is the receivers of the message. So these are the person or the people who are going to be receiving that message. And then, so those receivers, those audience are going to react to the message. So, and they are going to send some feedback. So the way they react, the way they respond is going to be basically a new message that is traveling from the destination now to the original receiver, and then the whole cycle starts again. There's one type of component that we need to, describe very briefly. So something called noise. So when you are communicating with others, there's typically some sort of noise always in the background. So these are the distractions from the communication. So it can be as basic and as simple as when you are speaking on the phone and there are kids screaming in the background. That's one type of noise. Another type of noise is all those filters or the different types of opinions that you have from others that can basically distort the message that is being formulated. Now we have to talk a little about what is known as the directions of formal communication. So in organizations, you have bosses, you have people under you, so when you are the boss, and then you have people who are on the same level as you. So sometimes we have downward communication, so when the information travels from upper levels to lower levels in the organization, so basically from bosses to employees. And then we have upward communication. This is when the information flows from lower level employees to upper or higher level employees or managers. And then we have lateral or horizontal communication. This is when you are communicating with your peers, with people who are in the same level as you. Like when a manager communicates with another manager, or when an engineer trying to communicate with another engineer, even if they are in a different department. So this is basically an illustration of what that means. When you have, downward communication, so this is an example at the left-hand side, when a managing director sends information to the person under them, so that's the general manager, and then it travels down all the way to regular employees and workers. And then you have on the right-hand side, this is when the process is basically reversed. So this is when workers or employees try to communicate upwards. So they are sending information up the pyramid or the hierarchy. So they send their information to their bosses, and then the bosses send it to their bosses, and then until it reaches the highest level in the organization. And then here at the middle, where we have this horizontal or lateral communication. So this is when, basically people who are at the same level communicate with one another. A very important part of business communication and communication in organizations is what is called the informal network. The informal network. So this is when information travels informally. What do we mean by informally? So this is when basically employees gossip, when employees exchange information, send and receive information, not through the formal or official means or mediums in the organization. When they communicate not using the company email, when they're not using actually like face-to-face meetings, when they're not communicating using letters and reports, this is when they basically exchange information informally. So why do we even study it? Because studies have shown that the accuracy of the information traveling through the informal communication network in organizations is up to 90%. So consider this example. When there are, let's say, rumors in the organization that the president of the company is going to resign and he is going to be replaced by another person. Rumors start to travel, so people will start to try to get some information about who is going to be the next president. The official announcement is going to take some time, of course. So, but people start talking to their friends, people start talking to their connections, and they are going to exchange information about who is being considered to become the president of the new president of the company. So this is how important this grapevine is. It is called the grapevine. So, and it is very important because it has been found not only to be accurate, but if organizations can actually use it to their advantage. Organizations can utilize the grapevine to know more about their employees and send better information, and to keep their employees better informed. And here are some patterns of this grapevine. So how does this informal information travel? So at the left-hand side, we have what is called the single strand. So this is when each person tells one other person. So Ahmed says to Khalid that the new president is going to be that guy, and then Khalid says something to someone else, and the information travels like a train basically. And then we have what is called gossip. So in gossip, there's one person who starts this this rumor or starts this chain of communication. So this is when one person tells everyone. They go around telling each and every person that this is what is going to happen, for example. And then we have probability. So this is when each randomly tells others. Okay, so this is when there's no obvious pattern here. So information is just traveling randomly. And then finally, we have the most typical type of grapevine pattern, and that is called a cluster. So this is when some tell selected others, and this is very obvious in organizations. You have your own, close friends and close colleagues in your organization. You have the people that you trust the most. You have the people with whom you hang out most often. So you are going to only tell them. And then they also have, certain close friends that are probably different from yours. So they are going to tell them. So that is what is known as a cluster. So this is when a group of people tell only their close friends and colleagues. And now we are going to move on to the next part of our business communication construct, and that is the barriers to communication. So when we talk about barriers of communication, we talk about the things that prevent you, that hinders the communication process, things that makes the communication process a little harder, something difficult to to understand maybe. So what are some of those barriers? We have barriers to verbal communication. Remember, we said we have verbal and nonverbal communication. When we said verbal communication, we meant spoken or written words. When we said nonverbal, we meant body language, facial expressions, etc. So let's talk first about the verbal communication barriers. We have inadequate knowledge or vocabulary. So this is, imagine this situation. This is when you are trying to communicate in English with another English-speaking person, and you basically cannot remember what the word in English. When you basically do not have enough vocabulary to communicate with the people, with the person that you are trying to communicate with. And then we have differences in interpretation. Remember, we had that filter. So sometimes, the way I understand this advertisement is different from the way you understand this advertisement. So sometimes this differences of explanation, how I understand it and how you understand it, there is a difference. So sometimes this difference puts us on opposite stands. And then of course something very obvious, and that is language differences. How many times have you been to a shop and you were trying to say something in Arabic or in English to the person who is selling you something, and he or she basically did not understand what you were trying to say? And then inappropriate use of expressions. So sometimes you have learned in your prep year and in your English composition classes, we have different expressions in English. We have also idioms. Sometimes when you incorrectly use them, it confuses the audience. So an expression like "it's raining cats and dogs," when the person is when the person does not understand what does it mean, they are going to be very confused. It's raining cats and dogs. Or when you use it in an incorrect way, like you think, oh, it's raining cats and dogs means that it's raining heavily. So if I want to say that I'm making a lot of money, I'm going to say I'm making cats and dogs. So you are inappropriately and incorrectly using an expression and therefore confusing your audience. And then we also have overabstraction and ambiguity. So overabstraction, what is when you have probably read a research paper, and in every research paper it begins with an abstract. An abstract is basically the most basic summary of this entire research paper. So when you are overly abstracting your message, you are making it very general, something that that is not communicating any concrete information. And also ambiguity. Ambiguity is basically when things are not clear. When you are being vague and you are not being clear, you are being ambiguous. So overabstraction and ambiguity are problems in communication. And finally, polarization. So in polarization, this is basically when you have, if you're not with me, then you are against me. You are either this or that. There is no in between, and that is definitely a problem in communication. So let's talk a little more about each and every one of those barriers to verbal communication. Let's begin with differences in interpretation. So when we talk about differences in interpretation, you have to understand something called denotation and connotation. So denotation is the literal dictionary meaning of the word. So if you were to look up the meaning of the word plastic in a dictionary, plastic is that synthetic material. is that, product that is produced by, SABIC and all these other plants, right? But there's also a different meaning to plastic. This is called the connotation. So that's the subjective emotional meaning that we attach to the word. When Americans say plastic, they mean that this is, cheap and artificial. You have probably heard the term plastic surgery. Plastic surgery. So, and also you have probably seen this expression in movies as well. When a person is trying to pay their bill in a restaurant, they're going to tell them cash or plastic. So meaning, are you going to pay using cash, or are you going to pay using your card, your ATM or your credit card? So this is the connotational meaning of the word, the subjective emotional meaning. So sometimes there's a problem there. And you have to be very clear of what you mean and how you understand these different messages. Denotation is the literal meaning of the word. Connotation is the subjective emotional meaning. Also, the word cheap. So cheap, the literal meaning of the word is that cheap, it means it's low in cost. A cheap car means that this car is not expensive. But also, a cheap car can mean that this is a very poorly made car, that this is a rubbish car, this is not a good car at all, this is a cheap car, this is a cheap laptop, meaning it was not made in a good way. So denotation versus connotation. And now with the second barrier to verbal communication, and that is language differences. So we have said before that this is probably a situation that you have found yourself in when you are trying to say something to a salesperson and they're not understanding you, basically because you don't have a common language. If you have probably traveled outside of the country and you were trying to negotiate some of the prices, basically there was no common language. So that's one of the biggest problems that an entrepreneur can find themselves in, and that is finding a good translator. When you are trying to, when you travel overseas, travel abroad, outside of the country, and you're trying to conduct business, or if you work in SABIC and then SABIC sends you to Vietnam in order to, try to find business opportunities there for the company, when they do not speak English and you need a translator, and that's one of the biggest problems that you might face, is that how you are going to communicate with the people there. So you need to find someone, you need to find a translator who speaks the local language, and huge problems can happen if you do not find a good translator, because some things are lost in translation, as the expression goes, lost in translation. So I'm trying to say something, but when I say it in a different language, the meaning is a little bit confusing and lost. So this is why care should be taken into hiring a translator whose native tongue is the target language. And the person that you choose as a translator also must have, must understand you very well, so that they understand what you are trying to say. So here are some examples of those, of those issues that can happen. You have probably seen this yourself in different stores, and we have plenty of examples that have gone viral on Twitter and other social media websites. So when people are trying to translate things literally using a Google Translator, you will find yourself having problems like here. So don't teach your garbage to swim. So that means absolutely nothing, and it means actually something very silly. Why did this happen? Because they were trying to translate it literally from Chinese using one of those online tools. We have to be fair still that Google Translator is evolving, and it is becoming very advanced, but still this is why you need someone else to take a look at your at the things that you are trying to say in a different language before you send them to others. I have had similar experiences to this, where some of the students are trying to say something in English, but they don't have enough vocabulary, for example. So they type their message in Arabic in a Google Translator, and then they send me what the Google Translator has generated, and then I find myself reading things that are very confusing. So this is why do not depend solely on a Google Translator or any other translation software for that matter. You have to have someone who understands the local language to take a look at it before you send it. Moving on to our next barrier to verbal communication, and that is inappropriate use of expressions. So in order to understand this, we have to understand the different types of expressions that we have. So in English we have slang, we have jargon, and we also have euphemisms. So slang is basically the type of language consisting of words and phrases that are regarded as very informal, and slang is more common in speech than writing, and it's basically typically restricted to only a particular context or group of people. So this is when certain expressions like "what's up" or when you see in American films, for example, saying that how many bucks, so meaning how many dollars. So that's slang. Okay, so that's the type of language that is very informal. And then we have jargon, so that's technical terminology. So jargon is basically the terms that are commonly known to a group of professionals. So when we say OB, the letters OB in business, and business students know this, we probably are referring to organizational behavior. But when we say OB to medical doctors, OB means this is a special type of medicine, obstetrics and gynecology. So when we say operation for you engineers, operation means those processes in a plant, right? But when we say operation to medical doctors, we mean surgery. So this is the jargon that we talk about. And then we have finally euphemisms. So these are used instead of words that may be offensive or inappropriate. So basically it's a type of an expression that we use in lieu of saying something that may offend others. We will see a couple of examples in the next slide. So here are plenty of examples of euphemisms. So in order to be more respectful, more considerate, and to show compassion sometimes to others, you will try to use euphemisms instead of words that might sound a little harsh or mean. So instead of saying someone died, you can say someone passed away. Instead of saying someone died, you can say they departed. Okay? They say sometimes correctional facility instead of jail. When you say differently abled instead of saying handicapped or disabled. Okay? So when you are just trying to be more respectful and you're trying to show your understanding and compassion towards others by choosing lighter words, words that that do not offend the people that you are trying to describe them with. Also, more types of examples of euphemisms. So, economical with the truth instead of liar. In between jobs instead of saying someone is unemployed. So we have lots of different examples, whether it's in English, in Arabic. So lots of other things that we can use over here. So euphemism is something that you also need to be familiar with, whether it's in English or in Arabic or in any other language, so that you try to be more respectful and show more understanding of others. And here is the next barrier to verbal communication, and that is overabstraction and ambiguity. So what are abstract words? Abstract words identify an idea or a feeling instead of a concrete object. They, something that you cannot see and touch. So when the abstraction on its own, it's not a problem, but when you overly abstract things, you are not saying something concrete to others. So when you are trying to describe a person, and you imagine this in a job interview, if I come and tell you, what do you think about Khalid? We are thinking of promoting him to become a manager. So I want you to say something concrete about Khalid. I want you to say something about his work ethics. I want you to say something about his work style. I want you to say something about his achievements. But instead you say something like, he is a good guy. What does that mean, good guy? Does that mean that, you know, he's a good boss? Does that mean that he has good leadership qualities? So you are being overly general. So, and I'm not getting anything concrete that I can use to, you know, base my decision on. But concrete words identify things that can be touched or seen. So this is, let's go back to our scenario, for example, of Khalid. So this is when you are using concrete words to describe Khalid, you will say things like, he is very good when it comes to meeting deadlines. He was never late to work. So you are describing Khalid in a concrete way. So something that I can, you know, base my decision on. When we say also concrete words, you know, from the definition itself, something that can be touched or seen, something that you can actually put your hands on. And abstract words are, you know, things that you cannot really see and feel. If you are a computer student, computer science student, the difference between software and hardware. So this is like the difference between abstract words and concrete words. Software is intangible. Software is intangible, something that you cannot see or touch. They're still very important, but this is something that you cannot see or touch. Concrete words is like the hardware, things that you can actually put your hands on. So this is a different barrier to communication that you must also be aware of. And finally, we have polarization. And polarization is the sharp division of a population or group. So this is when you say you either belong to this group or you belong to the other group. There's no in between. And that is definitely a problem. Imagine this situation. So if I say I do not agree with your idea, so just because I do not agree 100% and fully with your idea, it doesn't mean that I hate your idea, or it doesn't mean that I'm against you. I may agree with your idea 60%. The remaining 40%, I believe that there's some room to improve your idea. But the problem is when you understand it this way. If you do not agree with me 100%, it means that you are against me. It means that you are trying to, work against me and trying to ruin my idea and trying to ruin my reputation. That's definitely a big problem. And what you do not say can also cause issues in communication. So it's not only about the words that you speak or write, or the facial expressions and the body language cues that you display. Sometimes what you do not say can also be a cause of a communication problem. How is that so? When you do not basically say certain types of words that others expect from you, this can cause an issue. So far, we have discussed the barriers to verbal communication. Now we will talk about the barriers to nonverbal communication. So the first one is inappropriate or conflicting signals. When you are using voice tones or body language, facial expressions, hand gestures, etc., sometimes you are sending conflicting messages. When you say something using your spoken words, but the body language and the gestures that you are using with your hands is saying something completely the opposite, this is definitely going to confuse your audience and your receivers. And then we have differences in perception. So we have seen this before. So the filter, remember? So I understand a message differently from the way you understand it. So the same message, we analyze it and receive it differently. Why? Because of our points of views, because of our perceptions, because of our biases. Anything can be an issue there. And then we have inappropriate emotions. Inappropriate emotions. When you are very upset, when you are very angry, sometimes the message does not travel clearly. Or when you are very sad, for example, or when you are using, an emotion that doesn't align with the message that you are formulating. So that becomes a problem. And then finally, distractions, like the noise. Remember the noise that we talked about. So anything that can distort the message, that can hinder the receiving and the formulation of the message. So we begin with those, those conflicting or inappropriate signals. Okay. So this first example is the thumbs up, the regular thumbs up. In the US, in lots of cultures, including here in Saudi Arabia, when you give someone the thumbs up, it means that you are telling them that they have done a good job, right? So this is, you have seen this symbol in like YouTube, for example, in lots of other social media. So the thumbs up means that you like this and this is a good thing. But in certain cultures, this is a very offensive gesture. It's like giving someone the middle finger. This is how offensive it is in other cultures. Okay, and then also this move that when you use your your index finger to say to someone, "Come here." So in lots of cultures, this is very acceptable. This means that yes, come here or come closer. But in different cultures, it also means, something very offensive. So when you travel, whether it's for business or for just tourism and pleasure, you need to be aware that what is considered acceptable in your culture is not necessarily accepted in others. So you have to be very careful when it comes to using body gestures and expressions and so on. And here are some examples when it comes to differences in perception. The way, from my point of view, this is a 4. From your point of view, from where you stand, this is a 3. So none of us is wrong. Both of us are right, but we are just not seeing eye to eye. We are not seeing it from the same perspective. Okay? The same thing applies whether this glass is half full or half empty. Why did this person, how do I see it as half empty or half full? It's based on how positive I am, how negative I am, based on how I was raised, based on how I feel at the moment, and so on. And then those inappropriate emotions that we talked about. So how can you communicate with someone who is screaming, who is shouting, who is very angry, speaking loudly, so this is emotions should facilitate communication, but at the same time they can hinder communication. So you need to be in control of your emotions so that you formulate a message and send it clearly. And finally, we have this distraction or noise. So when the message travels from the sender to the receiver, sometimes there are things that happen in between. So that noise or distraction is anything that can hinder communication. It can, slow it down, reduce the clarity or the accuracy of the communication. And when we talk about noise also can be internal and external. So it can happen from, you can be the source of that noise, or other things in the surroundings, in the environment, can cause that noise. So you need to be aware of that noise and you should try to reduce it as much as possible. And it can be as straightforward and as basic as someone screaming in the background. So if you are going to record your presentation and send it to me as a video, you need to select a very quiet room with people in your house are being quiet, and there's no loud noises that distorts your message. At the same time, sometimes noise, as we mentioned, can be internal. So this is when you are maybe being too angry to say something, and this causes this noise and distraction. And now moving on to our next part of the communication process, and that is the media. So we have talked about the components, we have talked about the barriers. So let's talk a little about the channel, like how are we going to send our messages? So we have written communication examples. So when we use communication in writing, so we use brochures, we use statements, we use letters, we use emails, and lots of different mediums that we can choose. When we talk about oral communication examples, so spoken communication, we have one-on-one meetings, we have team meetings, we have conferences, we have phone calls, right? And we also have things like video conferences and so on. So different types of options available to you. The question that we will ask later is, based on what do you choose your medium? And choosing your medium of communication should not be something that you do arbitrarily. This is something that you should think about very carefully. How you send your message can sometimes make or break your objective, okay? And then we, of course, have lots of technology-based communication channels that are available to us. So we have social media, we have emails, we have text messaging, instant messaging like WhatsApp and so on. So each and every one of those has its own advantages and disadvantages. So you have to be aware of how you send your message based on what you are going to select your channel. And which one is more effective. We cannot say that something is just effective all the time. It depends on the context, it depends on the content of the message, it depends on the receiver. So you have to take all of those elements into consideration. Social media examples, we have a lot of those. We have Twitter, we have YouTube, we have Facebook, lots of other, TikTok, all of those are social media examples. So you need to be aware of each and every one of them. So if you are trying to say something about your organization, are you going to post it on Facebook or on Twitter or on LinkedIn? And so you have probably seen this. The way a certain company sends messages on Twitter is different from the way they write it on Facebook. Why? Because the audience in Facebook is different from the audience in Twitter. So this is what we are talking about over here. It's not, one size fits all. It's, customizing the message based on the audience and understanding that different channels of communication propose different challenges and have different advantages and disadvantages. So here is sort of a rule of thumb, or a good way to follow when you are trying to select and choose your communication media. So we have a continuum over here. So at the very left-hand side, the very far left, we have a rich communication media. So these things include things like face-to-face and in-person oral presentations. Why are they called rich? Because you exist in the same location as your audience. There's instant message. There's an instant travel of the message and an instant travel of the feedback. When you use some of those types of rich mediums, you can utilize all types of communication, verbal and nonverbal. So I can give you a handout in a class, and I can speak, and I can show you a picture. So this is why it is so rich when you are doing a face-to-face meeting, and then it gets a little less rich when you move towards this continuum to the right. So when you use video conferencing and online meetings, and then all the way up to a text message or an email, where it's only one type of communication, and that is verbal written communication. Okay, so only written communication that you find in a text message or an email. So sometimes you miss on the emotions of the sender, you miss on the the feelings of the senders. Some things cannot be communicated just using words. So based on the urgency of your message, based on the content of your message, these are the different options available to you. You need to be very careful of what you select as your channel. So you have to ask yourself lots of questions when it comes to choosing your medium of communication. So the relationship considerations, okay? So this group of people, or this person that I'm trying to communicate with, how good of a relationship do I have with them? How strong of a relationship do I have with them? Is it good news? Is it bad news? Is it, how likely is the audience going to react? Is this a confidential? Is it a secret message? Is documentation needed? So this is something that you must ask yourself. Are you going to tell someone that their father died, or their father passed away, using euphemism, that their father passed away, using a text message? Or is it better to sit with them in person and try to communicate this to them in a very light way. So when you are sending your customer their work order or their contract, are you going to send it using WhatsApp, or is it better to use an email so things are more officially documented? So these are the things that you need to ask yourself, okay? And then we also have logistical considerations. So these have to do with the relationship, the one on the left-hand side, but we also have to ask ourselves about the logistical consideration, meaning, how many people am I going to send this message to? Is it a lot of people, or is it only one person? How long is this message? How complex is it? So based on the numbers of the people, I'm going to definitely select maybe a different type of communication media. It's difficult to sit with all of the employees like in one meeting and to communicate something to them. But when this is a general message that we need to send out and disseminate to our entire organization, maybe it's a better idea to send it through our newsletters, through the email. Okay, does the sender have and the receivers, do they have access to technology or not? The probability of an audience understanding. So all of those things are elements that you must consider and carefully think of when you are choosing your communication media. Just because it has been done this way so long in the company, it doesn't mean that it is necessarily right. Okay, always try to ask questions, try to analyze each and every situation. Okay, just because this has been done for a very long, the company has always been sending this way in a newsletter email. Maybe there's a better way. How can you make that decision? Ask yourself all of those questions. And finally, we have the legal and ethical communication. So just because we understand now how to communicate, what type of media are we going to choose, what are the different barriers and the components of the communication process, it doesn't mean that we forget about the content of our message and the objectives of our message. There are always legal and ethical implications to every communication. So you need to be aware that as an employee, you are now students, but you are being prepared to become employees once you graduate. So this is why they always say that any email that you send as an employee or even as a co-op student, you must always copy your supervisor. In Outlook, there's that you have the to bar. This is when you write down the email address of the person who is going to receive that message. But then also there's the CC part, right? So that's the carbon copy part. So this is when you copy your supervisor so that your supervisor knows what you're doing. And this way you protect yourself, basically. So you keep your supervisor informed, and then you document this in case anything happens in the future. So sometimes there's this question: if I delete an email, is it gone forever? I do not think so. There are all types of different sorts of way to recover deleted content, whether it's an email, whether it's a post, whether it's a picture, whatever. So there's always a way to recover deleted content. So if you know this now, then you must avoid writing or saying anything that would not you would not like to become public. So make sure that when you become an employee in the future, or a co-op student in the near future, make sure that you always send professional emails. Do not send those jokes. Do not send those funny messages and funny emails and newsletters. Keep it professional. This is a work email. Okay, this is official. You can exchange funny messages with your colleagues using WhatsApp or whatever. But when you are communicating using the company email, be very respectful and be very professional. You need to read and sign your company social media policy carefully. Nowadays, lots of companies have issued a sort of a guideline or regulations for their employees when they are using social media. Just recently, actually, Saudi Aramco has issued a statement to all of their employees. They told them that if you are a social media figure, if you are very popular on social media, you cannot say that you are an Aramco employee. You are not representing the company in an official capacity, and you should not use social media when you are at work. Okay, so those who are celebrities on social media, those who have thousands and thousands of followers, and they are employees of Aramco, Aramco has told them that you cannot use social media when you are on the job, and you cannot say to your followers that I am an Aramco employee, because you are not representing us in an official capacity. Okay, so you need to be aware of what you post on social media, because you might get yourself in trouble. Since we talk about ethical communication, let's talk a little about types of ethics. So we have professional ethics, and these are the things that are defined by the organization. So this is when the organization tells you that this is considered okay and this is considered not okay. So by complying to the rules of the organization, you are being professionally ethical. And then we have the ethics that are defined by society. So that's social ethics. This is when the society says that this is considered acceptable and this is considered wrong. So what is considered wrong and right by society is something that you also have to comply with, social ethics. And then finally, individual ethics. So when this is how you define right and wrong. Okay, even though something might be allowed by the company and something might be allowed by society, something considered acceptable by society, but you also have your own code of ethics. You have your own values and principles, right? So even though it is considered acceptable, something might be considered acceptable by society or organizations, you still try to avoid it because you don't feel that this is part of who you are. You feel and consider this as wrong. Here are some guidelines for you to keep in mind whenever you are making a decision to ensure that the decision you are making is actually ethical. So the first question you should ask yourself is the action legal? So whatever it is that you are about to do, is it legal? Does it comply with the law? Okay, and then does the action comply with our company's policies and guidelines? So professional ethics. So is whatever I'm about to do, is it against the rules and the regulations and the guidelines proposed by the company or not? And then who is going to be affected by the decision and how? So if I choose to, for example, say that starting tomorrow you all have to come to work at 6 o'clock, not 7 o'clock. So you have to consider who is that going to affect and how is it going to affect them. And then, does the action comply with the company values? So it's not only about the rules and the regulations, but it's also about the values. So we talk about things like culture. So is this something that the organization approves of, not in an official capacity, but in a more of an informal way? So in a more of norm. You have probably seen this term before, social norms. So is this something that is considered acceptable? So these are the unwritten rules, and values of the company. Okay, does it comply with the culture? And then finally, how will you feel after the decision is known? When the decision has been made and it is public now to all of the people that are affected by it, are you happy with your decision, or do you think that you are going to feel okay after that, or do you feel and think that this is not going to be something that I'm going to feel good about later in the morning? So is the action legal? Does it comply with the policies and the procedures and the laws and the regulations of the company? Who is going to be affected by it and how? And then, does it comply with the culture, with the general, agreements and the norms of the company and of the society? And then, how are you going to feel once the decision is made? This is how you can make an ethical decision. So here's a quick example about those, ethical problems that some organizations have, stumbled into. The known brand Listerine has claimed that their product prevent and cure sore throats. So by using their product, and they claim that even if you do not use, toothbrush, even if you do not use flossing, then you are going to, fight tooth decay and gum decay. And people have, filed lawsuits against this company because this was not a correct claim. Okay, it was not clinically supported, meaning that they did not have enough evidence to claim that their product can, cure a sore throat. This is something that needs, medicine and needs medical consultation. So this is it's, a problem that companies have fallen victims of because of poor communication. Because of poor communication and because of inattention to ethical decision making. So this is the end of our chapter. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.